Would you believe someone found a German Shepherd walking alone across the Mojave Desert, in 100-degree heat, miles from any town, without food, water, or even a clear direction? And yet, he kept going, like he was chasing something only. He understood, like he had a mission only he could carry out, even if it killed him. And when the hiker who spotted him finally uploaded the footage online, no one could believe the reason he was out there. Not even seasoned rescue teams, not even the family who thought they'd lost him forever. And especially not the woman who had once whispered a promise into his ear on the worst day of her life. A promise she never thought he'd remember, but he did. And that's where this story begins. On a Monday morning so hot, the pavement shimmered like glass, and the wind blew like it was carrying secrets. And in a quiet desert town, just a few miles north of Barstow, California, a retired nurse named Margaret Jensen was walking to her mailbox, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her aging eyes from the sun. When she paused by the fence and noticed her neighbor's old German Shepherd wasn't in his usual shady spot under the mesquite tree, and for the first time in over 3 years, the yard was silent, no tail thumping against the dry dirt, no soft bark greeting her from the gate, and something about that silence made her uneasy, because that dog Rex was always there. Always watching, always waiting, and even though his owner, Mr. Dalton, had passed away just a few weeks prior, everyone on the block assumed the dog had been rehomed to a shelter or distant relative. But Margaret knew better. She knew the look in that dog's eyes, that quiet focus. The way he always faced the horizon during sunset like he was waiting for someone. Like his life wasn't finished just because his owner's was, and deep down, Margaret had a strange, aching feeling that Rex hadn't been taken away at all. He had walked away. He was walking towards something only he understood. And when a heat advisory was issued 2 days later, and rangers spotted pawprints along a dried riverbed nearly 20 miles into the Mojave, it was the beginning of what would become the most shared dog rescue story of the year. A story so emotionally powerful that it stopped people mid-scroll, made strangers cry in public, and led thousands of people to ask themselves if loyalty had a limit. If a dog could keep a promise, even when the world had moved on, even when everyone else had forgotten, and to understand why Rex did what he did, you have to go back for years. To a single moment that changed everything, because before Rex was a hero dog wandering the desert. Before the cameras and hashtags, before the headlines and fundraisers, he was just a quiet companion to a widowed Army veteran named Jack Dalton. A man who had spent most of his final years sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea and a radio playing old country music. Talking to a dog who never interrupted, never judged, and never left his side, and though Jack had 2 grown daughters who visited once or twice a year, Rex was his constant, his shadow. The one who reminded him to eat when the pain got too bad, who nudged his arm when he forgot to take his meds, who slept beside his bed every night like a silent guardian, and who stayed completely still. Jack collapsed while changing a light bulb in the garage, his breathing shallow, his heart failing, and as paramedics rushed in and the neighbors gathered outside. Rex didn't bark, didn't panic. He just stood there, head low, eyes fixed on Jack's face. And when the gurney wheeled him away, Rex followed, but they wouldn't let him in the ambulance. And for hours that night, he lay curled by the garage door, waiting, hoping, his tail still, his ears twitching with every sound. And when Jack passed away the next morning in the hospital, Rex was left behind. Just another unclaimed pet on a property that would soon be sold. And though the neighbors tried to take him in, Rex refused to eat, refused to stay inside, refused to accept that Jack was really gone. And then one morning quietly, without anyone noticing, Rex slipped under the loose part of the fence and began to walk. Just walk. Not in circles, not aimlessly, but steadily, methodically. Across highways and barbed wire fences, past abandoned sheds and dry creek beds. Through windswept dunes and cactus groves, always in the same direction, always forward. Like he was going somewhere he'd been before, or toward someone he needed to see. And when a backpacker named Jordan Myers caught him on drone footage, just as the sun dipped low across the cracked sand. The image of a lone German Shepherd limping across the horizon, head lowered but unbroken. shook people to their core, because there was something about the way he moved. The way he looked ahead without fear, like he had made peace with pain, like he was chasing a memory across miles of silence. That made even the hardest skeptics stop and ask, who was this dog walking across the desert, and why wouldn't he stop and what was waiting at the end of those pawprints? And when Jordan followed him for almost an hour, carefully keeping distance so as not to spook him, he noticed something incredible. Something that explained everything around Rex's neck. Half buried in the fur that had turned sun-bleached and stiff was a dog tag, and on the back of it, barely legible, was a single word. Hand-etched with a shaky hand years ago, promise. And as Jordan zoomed in with his drone, as millions of viewers would soon replay that footage in slow motion, hearts aching, tears falling, what no one knew yet was that Rex wasn't just walking for Jack. He was walking for a little girl, a promise made before she left town. A final goodbye that never happened, and a bond so strong, so pure, that even time and death couldn't erase it, but to explain that we need to go back again. To one snowy Christmas morning, 5 years earlier, when a young woman named Emily Dalton, Jack's granddaughter, placed her tiny hand on Rex's head and whispered a secret she never thought he'd remember. Emily Dalton was only 7 when she first met Rex. A Christmas morning blurred by frost and childhood wonder, her pink boots crunching softly through the snow-covered porch as she followed the trail of boot prints left by her father. Just lifted her out of the car with one arm and carried in the presents with the other. His voice low and warm as he told her, "Grandpa's not used to visitors, so be gentle." And she had nodded, clutching her stuffed penguin, heart thumping like she was about to meet someone famous, because she'd never really known her grandpa, Jack. Not beyond the faded photographs on her dad's desk or the once-a-year phone calls filled with awkward silence and too many house school questions, but that morning felt different, like it mattered more than it seemed. And when the door creaked open and a wave of wood smoke and radio crackles spilled out, the first thing she saw wasn't Jack, but Rex, standing in the doorway. Like a statue, his brown eyes locked on hers, ears pricked but soft, tail unmoving, as if he was trying to figure out who she was without needing to ask. And Emily, small as she was, didn't flinch, didn't hide behind her dad. She just stepped forward and reached out a mittened hand, and Rex took a single step forward, sniffed gently, then pressed his forehead against her arm, and Jack, watching from his recliner, let out a long sigh and muttered, "Well, he likes her. Guess that settles it." And that's how it began, a bond that would outlast family visits and phone calls, a friendship that would quietly bloom in those brief winter weeks when Emily and her parents would drive up from Santa Clarita, staying only a few days before heading back to the bustle of their real life, and yet, somehow, it was always Rex. She remembered most, not the gifts, or the snowball fights, or the hot cocoa with too many marshmallows, but the silent way Rex followed her around the yard, the way he sat beside her when she watched cartoons on Grandpa's dusty couch, the way he nudged her knee when she cried after scraping it on the driveway, and especially that one evening when she snuck outside, heart heavy from overhearing her parents argue in hushed tones about Grandpa's health. And Rex, without a sound, rested his head on her lap under the fading sun and looked at her like he understood everything, like he was promising he'd never let her be alone, not ever. And that night, as the stars blinked above the desert and coyotes yelped somewhere in the distance, she leaned close to his ear and whispered, "One day, if something ever happens, you'll find me, right?" And Rex blinked once, slow and certain, and it became their secret. The kind of innocent vow only a child and a dog could make without knowing how cruel and fast the world could turn. And 2 years later, when Emily's parents separated and Christmas visits stopped, when Grandpa stopped calling and letters went unanswered, she cried herself to sleep, wondering if Rex had forgotten her, if he even remembered her face. If promises like that were just pretend, and over the next year, her world shifted. New school, new town, new routines, and somewhere in the noise, the silence of Grandpa's house became more distant, until one day it was a memory tucked away like an old shoebox in the attic, only to be jolted back years later when she saw the viral footage on her college roommate's screen of a lone German shepherd walking through the desert, and something in her chest cracked open, something ancient and fragile. Because even though the dog's fur was now graying and his gait stiff, she knew. That posture, that stare, that shape, she knew it was Rex. And when the footage paused on the tag around his neck, the tag that said promise, she gasped so hard her roommate thought something was wrong. But Emily couldn't speak, couldn't explain, because how do you tell someone that a dog you haven't seen in 7 years just walked across the desert to find you? How do you say that a promise whispered by a child was now being honored by a dog who had no map, no food, and no reason to keep going except love? And the thing is, she didn't even know where he was headed, only that he was still moving, still, walking across endless heat and sand and broken earth, following a direction that no GPS could define, and the world watched too, breath held. As more hikers and bikers along the desert outskirts began to spot him, some tried to lure him in with food and shade. Others called shelters or posted on forums. But Rex never stopped, never accepted help, never broke his rhythm, like every ounce of his being was tethered to something out of reach. With every passing day, his story spread, desert dog who won't stop walking. German Shepherd refuses rescue, the dog who keeps a promise, and soon people across the country were watching his path like a pilgrimage, tracking new footage, sharing maps, even forming search groups trying to understand where he was going and why. But none of them knew what Emily did. None of them had held his fur and whispered that promise into his ear. And now, seeing him out, there knowing he was looking for her, she felt a guilt so sharp it took her breath away, because she wasn't a little girl anymore. And the last time she saw Rex, she hadn't said goodbye. Hadn't known it would be the final time, and now she had no idea how to find him. To let him know she was still out there, still waiting, still hoping. And then she remembered something. Something Jack had once told her. Long ago, during one of those soft twilight talks on the porch, when the radio played and the crickets hummed, and he said, "Rex ain't like other dogs, Sweet Pea. He don't follow where he's told. He follows where he's needed." And that's when she realized Rex wasn't just walking, he was remembering. Tracing memories through sand and sky, following scents long faded and echoes long gone. And maybe, just maybe, he was retracing the only journey he could still find, the one between her and Grandpa's house, the only map etched into his heart. And if that was true, then maybe she could find him too. Maybe if she just went back, if she just returned to that old dusty house in the desert, to the place where the promise began, maybe, just maybe, he'd be there. And as she packed her bags and caught a Greyhound south, heart thudding with a mix of hope and fear, thousands of strangers online began flooding comment sections with questions, theories, prayers, and disbelief. And people began asking each other what they'd never asked before. Would your dog remember you after all this time? Would he walk for days just to find you? Would he keep a promise you made when you were only 7? And suddenly, this wasn't just about Rex and Emily anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever loved a dog, everyone who believed their bond was more than coincidence, and somewhere out there, under a burning sun and a sky full of silence, a German Shepherd kept walking. Each step pushing past limits, each pawprint carrying a piece of a forgotten story, and in the distance, just beyond the mountains, just beyond what even he could smell, a girl was coming home. Asterisk. The bus ride felt longer than it should have, every mile stretching into a lifetime as Emily leaned against the dusty window, watching the world blur past in a stream of colors and heat waves, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her backpack, her thoughts a whirlwind of childhood memories and unbearable what-ifs. Because what if she was already too late? What if Rex had collapsed somewhere between the sand dunes and the canyon ridge? What if those tired legs had finally given out and he was lying alone, forgotten in the silence of some nameless valley, while she sat helpless 20 miles away, retracing steps that were never meant to be followed this far? Hissed to a stop in Barstow's weather-beaten station, she grabbed her things and hurried outside, blinking hard against the sunlight. Her feet already moving toward the only place that mattered now, the house, the porch, the yard where she first met him. Because if there was any chance, any feint, Hope that Rex had made it back to where it all began. She had to be there, had to wait the way he had once waited for her. And as she walked the cracked streets of that quiet desert town, past boarded-up storefronts and rusted signs that hadn't changed since she was a child, the memories came rushing in, the sound of the screen door slamming behind her as she ran out to find him, the feel of his thick fur as she hugged him tight during a thunderstorm, the way his eyes had followed her every move like she was the only thing that made sense in his world. And it made her chest ache, because she never really said thank you. Never really said goodbye, just left one summer with a wave and a distracted promise to visit next year. But next year never came. And now everything depended on whether he still believed in a promise made by a girl who was too young to understand how life breaks people apart. And meanwhile, miles away, deep in the Mojave's brutal center, Rex was slowing down, his pace uneven, one paw dragging slightly with every step. His coat dusty and matted from days of dry wind, his eyes half closed as the heat pressed down like a weight, but still he moved forward, steady and silent. His nose twitching with the scent of something familiar, a trace of exhaust fumes, the faintest smell of old wood and cigarettes, the kind Grandpa Jack used to smoke when he fixed the truck in the garage. And even though his legs trembled and his throat burned with thirst, he pressed on, because something inside him told him the time was near, that he was close, and that if he could just make it over the next ridge, if he could just push through one more dune, he'd find her. He'd find the girl with the soft voice and the gentle hands, the one who whispered a secret into his ear so many years ago and back in town. Emily reached the house just as the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the driveway and painting the world in deep amber. Blah. And the sight of it hit her so hard she had to stop walking because it looked exactly the same, and yet completely different, the porch sagging slightly, the windows clouded with dust, the paint peeling off the shutters like old scabs. But the swing was still there, creaking faintly in the wind, and the gate, though rusted, still swung open, with that same familiar squeal, and she stepped through, her chest tight, her eyes scanning every inch of the yard as if he might suddenly appear from behind the shed or under the mesquite tree. But it was empty, so painfully empty, and she sank to the ground near the porch and whispered his name. Once, then again. Softer this time, her voice cracking with tears she'd tried so hard to hold in. And far away, Rex's ears twitched, his head lifting slightly. Because even though the wind carried nothing but sand and silence, he had felt something shift. Something old and beautiful, like the echo of a voice he'd been following all along without knowing it. And he moved faster now, through thorny brush and fractured stones, his body aching, his breath shallow, but his heart pounding with something stronger than instinct. Memory, loyalty, love, and in that moment, as Emily wiped her eyes and stood to call him again, the sound of distant barking rolled through the air like thunder, and her heart froze. Because she knew that bark knew it better than her own name, and she turned toward the desert, toward the edge of town where the old railroad tracks faded into nothingness. And she began to run, stumbling across the dry weeds and loose gravel, and each step felt like flying, because every part of her believed that this wasn't a mistake, that he had come for her, that he had kept the promise they made under that twilight sky so long ago. And when she crested the last hill, her chest burning and her shoes coated in dust, she saw him, far off, small and limping but moving, and even across that distance. Their eyes met, and the years fell away, and she screamed his name with everything she had, her voice cracking like lightning in the quiet, and Rex stopped, ears high, legs shaking. And he let out a single, sharp bark, the kind she remembered from the back porch on summer nights. The kind that said, "I found you," and then he collapsed, his body giving out just feet from the road, and Emily dropped beside him, tears streaming, hands trembling as she cradled his head and whispered again and again, "You did it. You found me. You found me." And cars began to pull over, strangers running with water bottles and towels, someone calling for help, others recording with trembling hands as they realized what was happening, that this was him, the dog from the desert, the dog who wouldn't stop walking as she held him in her arms. His tail thumped weakly once against the ground, and she kissed his head, whispering, "I never stopped waiting, I never forgot you," and the EMTs arrived just in time, lifting him gently onto a stretcher as Emily climbed into the back of the van with him, refusing to let go, and the video of her cradling him, murmuring soft words as he licked her wrist with the last of his strength, broke the internet within hours. Millions of views, millions of comments. People watching in silence as a promise made by a child and kept by a dog came full circle under a sky painted gold with memory. And as the rescue van sped away toward the nearest clinic, one old man watching from a nursing home in Phoenix turned to the nurse beside him and said, "That's Jack Dalton's dog, isn't it?" And the nurse, blinking in surprise, replied, "You knew him?" And he said, "No, but I knew a promise when I saw one." And that night, across the country, people tucked in their dogs a little tighter, whispered thank you before turning off the lights, and asked themselves, would my dog remember? Would he come find me? Would he walk across a desert just to keep a promise I barely remember making? And the answer, as Rex had shown them all, was yes. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and quiet hope, a strange mix of tension and tenderness that clung to the air as Emily sat beside the recovery table, her hands never leaving Rex's fur, her thumb tracing slow, careful circles near the tag that still hung from his collar. The word promise catching the light every time she shifted her wrist. And though the room was dim and sterile, filled with humming machines and tired nurses moving softly through shadow, it felt sacred somehow, like a chapel carved out of time, because Rex was still breathing, shallow but steady, and Emily had never felt such fierce gratitude in her life. Not even during birthdays or graduations, or the day she got her college acceptance letter. Nothing compared to the moment she saw those brown eyes flutter open for the first time after days of unconsciousness, and when the vet finally said the words, "He's going to make it," she collapsed forward, forehead pressed to the blanket over his chest, tears soaking into the threads as the entire weight of the world rolled off her shoulders. And outside, beyond the glass doors, and the line of cars still parked with headlights off, strangers were waiting, some clutching blankets and flowers, others holding signs that said "Welcome home, Rex, and the dog who kept a promise." And Emily had to blink a few times to believe it, because she hadn't asked for a crowd, hadn't called the news or the influencers or the reporters who now hovered quietly at the edge of the parking lot. Cameras lowered in respect, voices soft as they captured the most human story they'd seen in years, a story not about fame or fortune, but about love that refused to die, about memory that endured where words failed. And for the next few days, as Rex recovered slowly with IV fluids and warm towels and short supervised walks in the fenced backyard behind the clinic, Emily stayed by his side, sleeping in a borrowed cot, eating whatever the nurses brought her. Her world shrunk to a single point of light that pulsed with each breath he took, and during those quiet hours she told him everything about her new life in San Diego, about the roommates she didn't always get along with, about the job she wasn't sure she loved, about how sometimes, even now, she felt like that little girl again, standing in Grandpa's garage with scraped knees and two big dreams, wondering if anyone truly remembered her, if anyone would ever come looking. And every time she paused, Rex would lift his head just enough to rest it against her thigh. And that simple act undid her every time, because how did he know? How did he remember? How could he carry so much heart inside that tired, beaten body? And the answer, she realized, wasn't in logic or training or bloodlines, but in something quieter, the unshakable loyalty that dogs are born with, the kind that doesn't fade with time or distance or grief, the kind that we forget to believe in as we grow older, until a story like this reminds us, shakes us, and makes us fall to our knees and whisper thank you into the wind. And it wasn't just Emily who felt that, it was everyone watching. Thousands of people who began sending in their own stories, handwritten letters, emails, voice notes from tearful grandparents, even drawings from children who had just lost their first pet. Each one beginning the same way. I saw Rex's story, and I just wanted to say. And what followed was never simple, never easy. Because people don't write about dogs unless those dogs changed something deep inside them. And for every story about joy, there were 5 more about loss. about the dog who waited by the door. Until the end, about the one who licked tears off cheeks during a divorce. About the mutt who walked a child to school every day and waited until the bell rang. In reading those stories beside Rex's cot, Emily began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: community, belonging, the quiet realization that even in heartbreak, we are never truly alone. And one night, as the moon hung low and the sky turned lavender over the horizon, Rex stood up without help for the first time, his legs shaky but determined. And he walked toward her, not with urgency, not with drama, but with the slow certainty of someone returning home. And she opened her arms and let him lean into her, their heads touching, hearts synchronized, and the vet, watching from the doorway, smiled and said softly, "That's love right there. Can't bottle it, can't fake it." And the next morning, a man from the local sheriff's office arrived with something unexpected: the original microchip registration form. Pulled from decades-old files, the paper yellowed and creased, signed by Jack Dalton himself, and on the back, scribbled in faded ink, was a note: "If Rex ever goes missing, he's probably looking for Emily. Call her dad. She's his girl." And Emily stared at the paper, hands trembling, eyes full of unshed tears, because it was proof, not just of Jack's belief in Rex, but of Rex's belief in her. And when the clinic finally cleared him for discharge, when the cameras clicked and the crowd clapped and the wind picked up the scent of sun and dust and possibility, Rex walked out with his head held high, wearing a new harness embroidered with the word "Promise Keeper," and Emily holding his leash, with one hand and his tag in the other. And they didn't speak, didn't pose. They just kept walking down the gravel path, past the desert brush, into a future neither of them could have predicted. And in that moment, people across the country, from Florida to Washington State, from quiet farms to apartment balconies, paused their lives to watch, to cry, to smile, and to remember the dogs they'd loved, the ones they'd lost, and the promises they still hoped to keep. And Emily, later that night, sitting beside Rex on a motel bed, with the TV playing softly, and the windows open to let in the desert wind, posted a video message that simply said, "He kept his promise. I'll keep mine too. Wherever I go next, he comes with me." And the comments exploded. Hearts, tears, prayers. People sharing photos of their dogs sleeping beside them, their rescue stories, their pain, their joy, their memories. And somehow, through a journey that began in silence and suffering, Rex had started something bigger, something beautiful. A ripple of healing that spread through people who had long forgotten how deeply dogs understand us, how fiercely they love us, how silently they carry our burdens. And that night, just before falling asleep, Emily whispered once more into his ear, "I'm never letting you go again." And this time, he didn't need to walk through fire or sand or sun to answer. He just sighed, curled tighter into her side, and closed his eyes. They didn't go home right away, not in the way people usually do. Because after everything Rex had endured, after the endless miles across cracked earth and burning sun, after the quiet battles fought in the silence of desert winds and under the weight of a promise made by a girl who hadn't even known what forever meant, Emily couldn't bring herself to simply load him into the back seat of her car and drive off into the distance like the end of a movie. Not when every part of her body told her that this wasn't just about coming home, it was about understanding what home really meant. And over the next few weeks, they traveled together. Not far, not fast. Just little towns and empty roads, dusty motels with flickering porch lights and small diners that served strong coffee and asked no questions. And each stop felt like a small act of remembering, a slow return to something sacred. And Rex, though slower than before, though grayer and sleepier and content to rest longer in the shade, began to soften again, to trust that the world was no longer a threat, that he didn't need to keep walking just to find what he already had in Emily, who had once measured her life in deadlines and unread emails and social media likes, began to move differently too, speaking more gently, breathing more deeply, waking with fewer alarms, and falling asleep with more gratitude. And the bond between them deepened, not with grand gestures, but with quiet ones, the way he'd rest his head on her foot when she stopped to pump gas. The way she'd instinctively pour her water into his bowl before thinking of herself. The way they could sit in total silence for hours without ever feeling alone. And after a month of drifting, they finally pulled into a small coastal town. Just north of San Diego, a sleepy little place with cliffs and tide pools and a breeze that carried the scent of eucalyptus and salt. And it was there on a walk near the ocean at sunrise that she found a little blue house for rent. Nothing fancy. It's just 2 rooms and a sun-bleached porch and a yard full of dandelions. And something about it felt right, like it was waiting for them, and she signed the lease that afternoon. Her hands still smelling faintly of dog shampoo from the morning's bath. And as Rex wandered through the living room, sniffing each corner like he was blessing the walls with memory, she whispered, "This is it, boy. This is our new start." And from that moment on, life unfolded gently. Morning walks along the bluff trail. Warm eggs on the stove, long naps under the patch of sunlight that hit the living room floor just right. And in between it all, Emily began writing again. Not the essays or reports she used to dread, but stories. Stories about dogs who waited at school gates and by hospital beds. Dogs who barked once and saved entire families. Dogs who weren't famous but were everything to someone. And with Rex by her side, she launched a blog called The Promise Keeper. It took off in a way she'd never expected. Because people were hungry for hope, for warmth, for truth wrapped in fur and loyalty. And every post became a gathering place for those who had loved and lost and still believed in something bigger. And Rex, without trying, became the symbol of that belief, not because he was perfect or strong or young, but because he was real. He hurt, he aged, he limped, but he never gave up. And as more and more people sent in their own stories and pictures and tearful voice notes, something beautiful began to form a map, a tapestry of memory and love that stretched across states and generations. And on the 1-year anniversary of the day Rex collapsed near that desert road, Emily hosted a small gathering in the park, overlooking the sea, and people came from everywhere, Nevada, Oregon. Even a woman from Michigan who had lost her own German Shepherd 2 months before and said that Rex's story helped her keep breathing when nothing else could. Meant as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily took the stage with Rex lying peacefully. Beside her, his head on her shoe, his breath slow and even, and she told the story again. From the beginning, not with drama or tears, but with reverence, about a girl and a dog and a promise that neither time nor pain could break. And when she finished, she asked the crowd to close their eyes and think of the one dog who changed their life. Just for a moment, and the park went quiet, except for the sound of waves crashing below and the occasional sniffle from someone in the back. And she ended with a simple question: "Would your dog come find you?" And people opened their eyes full of tears and light and whispered, "Yes." And that night, as they lay curled on the couch with a blanket over their legs and the soft hum of the ocean drifting through the open window, Emily kissed Rex's forehead and said, "I don't know how many more years we get, but I'll make everyone count." And he lifted his head just slightly and let out a low, happy grunt. And she smiled because she knew he understood, and the weeks became months. And Rex grew older still, his muzzle whitening like snow on a mountain peak. His steps slower, his naps longer, but his eyes, those deep brown eyes, never dulled. And when the time finally came, a soft spring morning, the garden full of yellow light and the breeze carrying jasmine through the open windows, he went, quietly, peacefully, with his head in her lap and her hand resting over his heart, whispering "thank you" over and over again. And she didn't cry right away, just sat there in stillness, honoring him with silence, 'cause some moments are too sacred for sound. And later, when she finally did cry, it wasn't out of pain, but out of awe, because how lucky she was. How unbelievably lucky to be the girl he had chosen, the girl he remembered, the girl he found when no one else would have. Then she buried him in the yard under the old lemon tree, planting wildflowers over his grave and placing his tag, the one that said "Promise," on a small stone at the head. And every morning after, she'd sit by that tree with her coffee, reading letters from strangers, heading new rescues who came and went through her volunteer work, telling Rex about them all. And one day, a little girl named Sophia came to visit with her parents, a shy, wide-eyed child who had just lost her dog and hadn't spoken in 3 days. And when she saw Rex's photo on the wall, she walked right up to it, placed her hand on the glass, and whispered, "He's brave." And Emily knelt beside her, smiled through the tears, and said, "Yes, he was. And he taught me that some promises are never broken." And that night, when she posted the story on her blog, she ended with a simple line: "Somewhere out there, a dog is walking, still believing in you. Don't stop believing in him." And the comments flooded in. Thousands of people across the world writing in the dark, curled up with their dogs, or staring at empty bowls and leashes, whispering thank you into keyboards, remembering the one who loved them best. And as the stars blinked high over the California coast and the tide rolled in and out like breath, the world felt just a little softer, a little braver, a little more whole, because of a dog who walked across a desert, and a promise he never stopped keeping.